that, and then obviously take any questions or comments that you might have as it pertains to the new standards as they evolve. So second slide here, really want to explain just a little bit about the Standards Council mission and structure. And first and foremost, I have to say this is very much a team effort. The Standards Council is comprised of both academics and practitioners. So a lot of thought, a lot of back and forth conversation goes into every single one of these standards changes. And I really have to give credit to those folks that really devote a lot of time and energy away from doing other things to really help and to improve the entire CAHME experience and accreditation standards. So our mission, as defined by the CAHME board, is to regularly review and revise as appropriate the standards, procedures, and documentation for accreditation. And our primary function as a committee or as a council is to ensure that the criteria for accreditation are current, relevant, and I would add fair, and effective to achieve the overall goals of CAHME. So they're going to talk through basically three substantive changes to the 2017 criteria. Some are more substantive than others, but each one of them is worthy of mention. Perhaps the largest and the one that we devoted the most time to was Requirement E, the 120 hours of synchronous education for accreditation. Some of the background to this, of course, many of you might know, but some may not. There was Requirement E was in place for a good number of years, and really was has evolved, in terms of thought process over time, or the discussion about it has evolved over time. And the bottom line up front is Requirement E has been stricken from the standards. Now, to reach that conclusion or to reach that outcome, it was once again a pretty rigorous process. Some of you may have responded to an online survey of academic institutions offering graduate programs in healthcare management. There were two focus groups conducted at ACHE in Chicago, one with practitioners and one primarily with students. There was a literature review that I conducted in concert with some of my colleagues, just to kind of get a full breadth of understanding of what others have done in this particular area. And then there was some peer comparison going on with other accrediting bodies, the APA and ASPA, in particular in their review. The original task force, of course, that developed the 120-hour criteria, that was a task force as well several years ago. This particular task force that was put together to really critically review the 120-hour requirement. You can see the participants, primary participants on the page now. And the summary, really why we ended up setting aside and the board has approved the action is primarily as students and employers found the 120-hour requirement to be of little value. There's no magic behind 120. The question, well, why not 80? Why not 160? What's special about 120 hours? Academic organizations, more than 75% of students with little experience actually favor a synchronous requirement anyway. And really what the 120-hour requirement did in effect was preclude some programs from even getting off the starting blocks. So we might have a program that is incredibly effective in meeting its target market and basically supporting the employer's needs in that particular niche in which they serve, and it made it effectively ruled them out from being accreditable. Now, this does not change any of the other 35 criteria. It simply allows folks to enter the pipeline, and they still have to meet every other of their 35 criteria as they're defined. And basically this is step one with regards to the communication plan. Well, step one was really AUPHA and the conversation we had at the event in Boston. And then in concert with this webinar, we're also going to be publishing the literature review that was conducted and provide the data behind it, because it has been a concern from various parties, on both sides of the fence, if you will, for a long time. So we want to make sure that we're completely transparent with everything that went into this particular decision. And once again, to the issue of fairness, we want to ensure that the primary purpose behind CAHME is served with respect to ensuring that if we've got a clearly defined mission and vision, if an organization or program is meeting the employer's needs within the local market or whatever market it may serve, that we don't provide or don't impose basically unfair sort of restrictions on their ability to meet those needs. So, and again, we'll continue to evolve, and this was one of the primary changes that came out of the most recent review. The second big change that was done by the Standards Council recently was an adjustment to 3C2, which the program will regularly evaluate the extent to which each student attains the competencies at the level targeted by their program, and we'll have a process in place for communicating that information to students. What was changed about that particular criterion is that it no longer requires, or you're no longer required to assess competency at the course level. It doesn't change anything else about 3C2 with respect to having to assess competencies across the program and individual competency assessment and attainment, but it was a pretty significant source of discussion at the most recent Accreditation Council, and then several rounds of conversation since then with the board, with respect to what are we really getting from the course level competency assessment that has been imposed by the 2017 standards. So one of the rationales behind this was over 75% or 77% to be exact, programs in the last 6 years have not met that standard, and the failure rate is the next highest, or the next highest failure rate is only a third of that. More than half the programs who do not meet the criteria fail to have course level assessments. Our peer accreditors do not have the requirement, and really what it became, or what became pretty apparent is basically the expense and resource intensity of imposing this requirement, or programs enforcing this requirement, really did not yield the type of results that that were really of much substance or use. So, in one of the conversations at the most recent board meeting, really was this fallacy of the precise. We're collecting this data, but in most cases, programs are not able to make the data actionable or useful. So, in regards to 3C2, again, the requirement for course level competency assessment has been removed. And the last item with respect to what has changed with the criteria is with 2A5, and basically the tracking of career progression, if you will. And this was really a clarification of the standard. Again, lots of conversation at the last Accreditation Council meeting with respect to, well, what do we really expect programs to do, and how do we expect them to track their graduates' progression? Some confusion whether, well, do we have to survey our graduates every single year? Is it every third year? So on and so forth. So the change, or really it's a footnote change to the review elements within that criteria for the accreditors. Instead of basically the impression by some was that we had to survey students every single year, and only a survey will do. You can see how the change in language to the footnote is really clarifying, or is intended to be clarifying, with respect to how we gather that information and make sure that we're actually tracking what our graduates do and how they progress through their careers after they graduate. So that, of course, can include annual surveys, periodic surveys every 3 years, comprehensive use of an alumni directory of program graduates, active tracking via LinkedIn, robust alumni engagement and advisory board activity. Again, the primary intent of this criterion is to ensure that the program remains engaged with and actively monitors alumni to ensure graduates are meeting industry expectations and can secure and retain employment. So it really comes down to the evidence as a site visit team comes in and is able to assess, what's the body of evidence show? Is it robust? Is the program, basically following through and ensuring that they're remaining engaged with their alumni, and primarily to be able to feed that information back and continue with program improvement. So that's the rationale behind the change. And with that, Eric and everybody else, I'll open it up for questions or comments.
Great job, Brad. Thank you. Once again, for everyone who may have arrived late, we did record this this session, so this is going to be available on our website if you want to watch it again or watch the beginning again. And there are a high number of people on the webinar, so what I'd like to ask everyone to do is to type in their questions into the chat feature, and we'll do our best to answer them. And we have one here from, first one is from Miriam Wiseman, who is asking what we mean exactly by assessing course competencies at the course level.
Sure. Well, and thanks for the question. Well, honestly, it's been removed now, but originally the 2017 criteria required competency assessment at each course level. And I believe that the original intent, and speaking for the Standards Council, and I hope I characterize it appropriately, original intent was really as students progress through the curriculum, how is each one of the courses contributing, and how much is a student getting out of each of the courses from a competency level perspective, or competency attainment perspective, perhaps. Again, that has been removed as a requirement with respect to the course level competency assessment. What a program still is required to do, of course, is have a competency model that, of course, is tied to the mission and vision, values of the program and what it wants to achieve. That competency model, of course, still has to be mapped onto the individual courses, so we know what courses are driving what aspect of the competency model. And then there still needs to be competency assessment throughout the program and the duration of the program when the student is affiliated. So none of that has changed. It's simply the aspect of assessing competencies at the course level that has been removed. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. We'll see if we get some follow-up questions to that. Eddie Hooker had asked a similar question. I think your answer addressed his question. The next question's from Len Friedman, and Len asks whether there's a plan to evaluate the elimination of the 120-hour synchronous requirement on career attainment and progression.
Say that one more time. Let me find it on the chats here.
Is there a plan to evaluate the elimination of the 120 synchronous hour requirement on career attainment and progression?
I do not believe that there is currently a plan at the CAHME level to make that assessment. No.
Brad, it's Anthony. We continue to assess how programs are proceeding with student attainment based on the annual reports that are all the programs need to reply each year. And CAHME will continue to monitor that, as we do now, to ensure that there are no no distinctive differences between the synchronous and the asynchronous programs. So the approach for measuring and understanding that will continue to be through the annual report.
Thank you, Anthony.
Welcome.
All right, so the next question is in regards to the change to 2A5. Brad, would you mind navigating to that slide? All right, there we go. Okay, so Art Gonzalez is asking how we would characterize robust alumni in advisory, in an advisory board. And I think,
well, it's and I think it's a fair question. You know, the definition of robust, is it good enough? You know, that sort of thing. And I think it really, in my opinion, and it's one man's opinion, is a preponderance of the evidence. You know, and if you've gone, for those that have gone on a number of site visits, you know, is there a good body of evidence to show that there's an active and robust advisory council or advisory board? You know, is there evidence in the minutes? You know, what sort of involvement is taking place? You know, is it superficial or is it deep and, you know, meaningful with respect to the contributions that are being made to the program, the oversight of the program? I'm not sure that there's a one clear set definition, but that's also one of the reasons why we have a multiple person site visit team that comes in. There's a reason why we have a reader that evaluates that, accreditation council and board. So I don't know that there's a threshold to meet, but I would say it and characterize it as a preponderance of the evidence.
Great. All right, so Eddie Hooker's asked a follow-up question, and the question is, how much assessment and when do we need to assess?
For 2A5?
No, I think this goes back to the 3C2.
Yeah, 3C2 is what I was talking about. How often do we need to be assessing the students and by how much?
Well, it's almost, I would characterize it in much the same way. You know, again, one man's opinion of many. But I would say if you assess them once, probably not good enough. A pre-post, beginning of the program, end of the program, of course, I would characterize it as being better. And you know, from there, I think it's you know, I would argue that, you know, if I look back, you know, I don't mean to overlay one program on many, but if I look back to what we did at Army Baylor, with respect to, there was an objective and a subjective, or an objective and really self-assessment at baseline. There was assessment at the end of every semester. There was assessment throughout the you know, the residency requirement. So there were multiple kind of pictures into competency development of the student. As we've progressed, or as I've progressed into a different program at Trinity, we're taking a similar but not the same exact approach, where again there's an assessment at baseline, There's an assessment at the end of every semester, both basically from a soft, I hate to use that term anymore, but kind of a soft perspective, as well as kind of an objective assessment, and then again at the end of the didactic program, and then throughout the residency. So I think it again comes back to, is there meaningful evaluation of student competency assessment throughout the program? And then really the next step beyond that is, is that information acted upon or actionable by the program to drive meaningful or substantive change as we try to improve programs over time? Does that answer your question, Eddie? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's really a really good answer. Thank you so much.
Can I just ask a quick question? It's Miriam Wiseman. If we follow the AACSB competency assessment, is that sufficient to satisfy CAHME? And thank you.
Actually, it's a great question, and Anthony or Eric may want to chime in on this as well. And I'll tell you what I know, and then we'll be quiet while they fill in the gaps. We're currently in the process of evaluating kind of a concurrent CAHME AACSB, and I think that will probably evolve even beyond that point, be my guess, of what is, where is the overlap, if there is any, which of course we know there is, and where and how we can use the same sort of tools so that we're not overly burdening programs from having to do double work. Anthony, is that fair to assess or fair to say?
That's a great point, but what I would like to caution Miriam on it at this point is we're at the beginning part of the study of CAHME and AACSB accreditation, and where are there overlaps. So if you were to ask us today, if we follow the AACSB standards, are we in compliance with CAHME standards? My answer will be I don't know, because I don't know the detail of the AACSB standards. So right now you need to make sure that you're still in compliance with the CAHME standards. Over time, we're hoping that by the end of this academic year, we'll be able to announce some good news about a relationship with AACSB and accreditation standards.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we have a couple of questions on timing, and Brad and Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe these changes are effective immediately for all programs applying for accreditation and for programs with site visits in fall 2018, spring 2019, and going forward. And another question we've gotten, and we have been thinking about, is the programs that have gotten partially METs on 3C2. And what we've discussed, we want to deal with this on a case-by-case basis based on which aspects of 3C2 and its predecessor 3C3 the program had a partially met on. It doesn't make sense to require programs that were visited in the past to be compliant with something we're not requiring anymore. But again, it really depends on the specific finding, and we're going to take those on a case-by-case basis.
Rick, I see a question from Lisa that had asked, does 3C2 programs no longer have to measure student level competency attainment at the course level? And she asked us to confirm that. That's true. It was approved by the board at our June meeting. The Standards Council revised the standards. Those standards were approved by the board. So yes, programs no longer will have to measure student level competency at the course level. So yes, that's confirmed.
All right, scrolling down, got a question from Nolan. In order to report program level competency assessment, the student and course level competency assessment are the building blocks for competency assessment. Without the requirement for student course competency assessment, it'll be difficult to report program level competency assessment. Excellent question. I don't think we intend for programs not to assess any competencies at the course level. That's still going to be an important data point for programs, but this change offers programs a lot more flexibility in their assessment of competencies.
Yeah, and I would add, Eric, this doesn't preclude that you can do it at the course level. It just doesn't require it. So if you want to continue to do it at the program level, or assess at the course level within your program, absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I would say that will exceed the standard, but it doesn't require it any longer, or the standard doesn't require it any longer.
All right, and Bob Bonney is drawing our attention to the second half of Lisa's question, which asks whether student level assessment is required, or just program level assessment. I think the answer to that is that yes, student level assessment is still required. You just don't have to do that at the course level. You can.
Correct.
You have to. Okay. Yeah. All right, I think that's all the questions I see here. If there's any I've missed, I apologize. I can email me and we'll answer your questions. Unless there's any final. Oh, here we. All right, Lisa has a follow-up question about student level assessment. And it looks like I skipped Amy as well. Lisa, do you want to unmute yourself? All right, and I'm scrolling up to Amy's question. Amy's question is in regard to the eligibility statement. And this is more technical. Will sections D and F be revised? These still reflect the old requirements, synchronous hours? And the answer to that is yes. We're currently working with our web developer, Liaison International, to update the system and remove requirement E and re-letter the rest of the requirements. So yes, although it may still be there today, we're working on removing that. All right, and we have Michael McDonald has asked, will CAHME compare itself to IACBE?
And Eric, let me kind of address that. IACBE is a great business school accreditor. We are kind of looking at the market that's out there. A lot of CAHME programs also have AACSB accreditation. So just in terms of how do we examine this process, given, like any organization, limited resources, we're looking at AACSB first. And, you know, and then we're going to be looking also at CEF, and those were two specific strategies that were approved by the board. When you start to look at some other accreditors, you know, that is not, it's not on the docket to be looked at this year, but it's not something that we're ruling out in the future. But good question about other accreditors, and you know, if you'd like to help in that area, you know, send us an email and we'll be in touch.
All right. Lisa's written in her follow-up question, and her question is, do we define student level assessment as every single student must be assessed during their time in the program? And the answer to that part, I believe, is yes. Going on, and do those results need to be conveyed to them? Again, still yes. That is not how AACSB does it. Program level captures reasonable populations of the student body, but does not require every single student be individually assessed.
Yeah, the CAHME standard, as it currently reads, is as you see it on the screen, and that's 3C2.
Yeah, and that was an issue that we did address at the board level and at the standards level. We know that there is a difference with AACSB there, but we are asking, and the importance of competencies for CAHME are such that we believe that every student needs to be assessed and evaluated and counseled on how well they're meeting the competencies. What we're doing, though, is we're removing that at the student level, course level. But students will still need to be assessed. There's just not after every course.
All right.
And I'm more than happy if those that, you know, if anybody needs any help or support there, I'm more than happy to share what we did and what we presented at AUPHA this year. More than happy to share the tools we used at Army Baylor and what we do at Trinity. Again, don't want to overlay any program on another, but I mean, the tools are easy to share. So happy to help.
Next question is from PJ Maddox, and she asks whether there are programs working on their self-studies due this fall. Will the Shell and e-accreditation be updated with these changes? And the answer is yes. We've been working with Liaison. The system changes are very, very minor. They're text changes, so those updates should be made in the next week or so. All right, and I think that is all the questions. All the questions we have. Again, thank you everyone for attending the session and asking great questions. And thank you, Brad, for explaining this so well. Really appreciate it. And if there are any other questions, anyone needs anything, please feel free to reach out to any of us.
And Eric, are you going to post the slides somewhere so folks can download them?
Yes, we'll be posting the slides and the webinar.
Perfect. And I again want to express my thanks to everybody for participating, and I want to, again mention those folks that that contribute to the Standards Council and CAHME in general. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, so I want to express my thanks to all those that have taken part.
Brad, thank you for your leadership